Let me turn to Linda Chavez.
Well, after that very sobering view, first of all, obviously, I am not a nuclear arms expert. I've spent my life mostly in politics and public policy. But what gives me, I think, some insight into what's going on is the early part of my career where I served with the American Federation of Teachers, which is a large public employee union in the United States. And I learned something about collective bargaining during that process. When you have parties coming to the bargaining table, in order for bargaining to be successful, in order to have a successful outcome, both parties need to know what it is that is essential to their goals and what it is they are willing to give on. Now, it's very clear what Iran hopes to seek in these negotiations. The country has, in fact, been crippled by the economic sanctions. They have, in fact, worked well. And the Iranian people have suffered, and the regime, knowing the discontent among the Iranian people, hopes to lift the sanctions in order to basically keep a lid on what is a possibly explosive situation in that country. So they hope to gain out of these negotiations some time. I think Director Woolsey is correct, and others on the panel are correct, that their real intention is certainly not to dismantle their program, perhaps to delay it, or at least delay it in such a way that work is going on in other places that will allow them to break out in a short period of time. But their goals are clear. What is unclear to me is what the United States goals are and what it is that President Obama seeks to gain with this. Well, maybe I'm being a little dishonest in that. I think it actually is pretty clear what he seeks to gain in it. This is not about stopping Iran from building a nuclear weapon. It may have started out that way. I think when Barack Obama was running for president in 2008, when he was still a candidate, he believed that on the force of his personality and intelligence, that if he simply sat down with, at the time, Ahmadinejad, Fidel Castro, and Kim Jong-il, that he would persuade them to change their evil ways and to simply cooperate with the rest of the world. I mean, he talked about it. He talked about, I want to engage in direct conversations. I think this is the way we ought to proceed. Well, obviously that didn't happen, and he was elected president, and in 2009, as Ali Reza has talked about already, we had street protests in Iran. The people of Iran, fed up with the regime, with the brutality and the deprivation caused by the regime, took to the streets. And as I don't need to tell anybody in this room, all you had to do is turn on television. The signs in the streets, many of them were in English. Many of them were appealing to President Obama to support democracy in Iran. But he turned a blind eye to that. Fast forward several years, and the Obama administration, and President Obama himself, who started out with high hopes of changing the world, transforming the world into a better place, bringing peace and prosperity to his own country, peace throughout the world, finds himself, frankly, in a much more dangerous world than he inherited. And we now have a threat in the Middle East, turmoil in a variety of countries. Yemen, which less than a year ago President Obama described as a success story in our counter-terrorism strategy, is now, because of the influence of Iran, because of the help of Iran with the Houthis, has in fact collapsed. We see that after the blood and treasure that was spent in Iraq, when American forces were able to bring a degree of stability, remove a brutal dictator and bring a degree of stability to that country once the Obama administration essentially said, we're taking the troops out, we don't have a status of forces agreement, and what comes will come. Well, we know what's come. What's come is the Islamic State and huge incursions and huge threats to the stability of Iraq. Well, now we are in the middle of negotiations with Iran on a nuclear treaty, and the president has a major problem in the region, and particularly in Iraq, with Islamic State. He's not willing to commit U.S. troops to go and to try to bring stability to that country. So where does he turn? Where does he allow the Iraqis to turn? To Iran. And so now we, I think, are faced with a situation where what the president has to get out of these negotiations, and why I think the administration is going as easy as they are, is giving up much more than they need to give up, is in the hopes that Iran will pull our irons out of the fire in Iraq. And I think this is an extraordinarily dangerous situation, because as big a threat as the Islamic State is, in my view, and again, I'm not an expert, but it seems to me that we have a history of 35 years of experience with the state of Iran as the major state sponsor of terrorism throughout the world, having targeted more Westerners, more Americans than any other major terrorist threat. So the idea that in the negotiations that take place in Switzerland, we are going to make concessions, I think in part to hope that we're going to be able to stave off the situation in Iraq is, I think, terribly, terribly dangerous. I think President Obama is also looking at the end of his tenure. He's looking at his 8 years in office. He has one accomplishment to his name. Some of us on my side of the political aisle don't think of it as much of an accomplishment, but he certainly is proud of it, and that is, of course, Obamacare, health care insurance for American citizens that the president pushed through. He has nothing to show in the foreign policy arena, absolutely nothing. He came into office with many people, certainly elites in the United States, and I think in Western capitals around the world, looking for a new day of, this very smart, engaging, charming new face to somehow bolster the image of the United States abroad. Well, the image of the United States today is much worse than when President Obama took office. But I believe that he thinks that if he can take home a nuclear deal with Iran, he will have that to balance the scale in terms of what his accomplishments are. Meanwhile, in doing this, he has made the world a much more dangerous place. Not just because of what's happening in places like Iran and Iraq and Yemen, but there is no question that once it is clear that Iran will have a nuclear weapon or nuclear weapons, this will not be a non-proliferation treaty. This will be a proliferation treaty. It will be an open invitation to others in the region to pursue nuclear weapons. I see no way that that can possibly stop. So I look at this from a more political point of view. I look at it from the point of view of somebody who's been involved in a different kind of negotiations. But I look at the United States as not the superpower in the world, but the United States in a position of tremendous weakness when we sit at that bargaining table. And I think as a result, the world that we are entering is going to be much more dangerous than the one we live in today. Thank you.
Thank you.